we have compass rose. Yeah, that's the direction you move it around, all right? And literally that's an arrow and you move it around on the map, yeah? Monitors I talked about, requests to change things in the liminal space. What we call in the Pantopticon to change the transparency. Right? So if you increase transparency, you reduce innovation. If you reduce transparency, you increase innovation because people can hide things. Yeah? So for example, when I worked in IBM, the guy I worked for, shows you how big IBM, his rounding error every quarter was $250,000. So if there was a $249 million item, it just got rounded down to 0. This is IBM, right? That meant he could hide things. Right? So he innovated because he could take risks. Then actually the transparency increased. Nobody could do anything without headquarters knowing it. Innovation went through the floor. Okay? So transparency is kind of like an Aristotle's golden mean thing. Yeah, too much or too little is a bad thing, but it's something you can adjust. And so increasing or decreasing transparency of something changes what happens, yeah, in terms of the way it works. Stabilize, I talked about that. Trigger, I talked about that. Conditional changes. Now I'm going to do something relatively quickly now, but it's important for organisational change. So I'll come back to that one. Yeah. Research, we need to look into it more deeply. We need to destroy this thing. Yeah, and the final one, which I'll come back to later, is we need to make this so rigid it acts as scaffolding.
Scaffolding?
Yeah? Scaffolding?
Gerüst?
Yeah. So, and that's actually a powerful thing.
Why do we need to destroy it?
Because it may be harmful. We just get rid of it.
Okay.
Yeah, it may be damaging things. You may just want to kill it. Yeah?
What do you need to destroy?
Destroy it, get rid of.
One of the hexes.
No, well, I don't mean physically burn the hexie on the table. You could do that symbolically. What I mean is whatever the hexie has on it is something which exists in the organisation. You don't want to, you want to get rid of it.
Got it. But not the entire thing.
No, not the entire thing. But this one, we're going to get rid of that. How the hell do we do it?
Yeah.
Now, conditional change is important. Now, there are 3 major frameworks in the Cynefin firmament. I'm not going through Cynefin today. S-strime mapping actually comes first. Once you've got the actions out of S-strime mapping, then you put them onto the Cynefin framework. Yeah, so that Cynefin is a decision framework, it's not a complexity framework. S-strime mapping is a complexity framework. Yeah? And Cynefin uses Cynefin, it's not just that. Now, you've all seen the life cycle curve. Everybody seen life cycle curves? And depending on who you talk to, so this is a simplified version. You get this phase here, which is called, you know, they call this early adopters, yeah? Normally about 2.5% of the market. And by the way, this roughly works in organisations as well. You then get the early majority, which is about 13.5%. And by the way, in marketing terms, whoever wins market share here dominates the later stages. This is the most critical stage. Yeah? You then get late majority, and then finally you get sad bastards, otherwise known as laggards. They only buy things after everybody else has bought them and everybody else realises they're not working anymore. Yeah? By the way, 3 of the big 5 consultancies teach this. When you can't sell it anymore to industry because they know it doesn't work, sell it to government as industrial best practice. It is that cynical, and they put lower grade consultants on it. They actually teach that. Yeah? And we need to break that because government needs to innovate. That's one of the jobs of small consultancies like you guys. Yeah? Now, the big, remember something, all right? The big consultancies grew on the back of business process re-engineering and the switch from scientific management to systems thinking. And everybody criticises scientific management, but nobody's ever bothered to read Taylor. Taylor automated things which could be automated, and he didn't automate things which couldn't be automated. What systems thinking tried to do was to automate everything. Right? So that was a big switch, yeah? And it was driven by business process re-engineering for the hard stuff and learning organisation for the soft stuff. Yeah, both top down, that triggered it, right? The consultancies grew on the back of that. Because what SAP did, remember SAP? I set up an SAP business. It created a huge market for lots of analytical consultants using the ARIS toolset, following recipes. And that's what the consultancies grew off, and that's what the business schools grew off. They didn't exist until then. And their whole system is based on the fad cycle. Yeah, they have to have, I mean, McKinsey's are shameless about it now. Like every 2 years, there's just another magic mystery solution based on their so-called research, all right, which doesn't stand up. Yeah, well, you all know that one. So I actually think, and if you haven't read Carla's book about the way McKinsey's have corrupted governments worldwide, read it. She's an economist from UCL.
What's it called?
I forgot what it's called. Anybody remember it? I'll look it up. I always forget her name, even though I know it, which is embarrassing. She basically took McKinsey's apart, because McKinsey's wrote our health policy, while at the same time acting as UK agents for American healthcare firms. Yeah, it is that hypocritical.
I know the story, but I don't know the article.
Yeah, the head of McKinsey's public sector in the UK was married to the senior civil servant in the Cabinet Office. Yeah.
The same is true with BlackRock.
Yeah, it's a real problem, right? Now, what happened with Moore? Geoffrey Moore produced a wonderful book called Crossing the Chasm, which, even though it was written 30 years ago, is still relevant today, which is rare for a marketing book. He said what actually happens is it doesn't look like that, it looks like this. He drew it differently, this is my adaptation. What happens is something new is always bought by people who like novel things. And then these guys wait to see if it works or not before they buy. So the trouble is, companies say, oh, this is wonderful, it's going to go like that, and it doesn't. They drop into the chasm, and that's why companies fail. The other reason is they don't make the switch. To be honest, I'm having a real problem with my own consultants, because they still want to sell the theory when these guys want to buy the practice. So these guys, you have to be sound on theory, because they're interested in the theory, that's what they're buying. These guys couldn't care less about the theory, they want to know what will it do for us, what will the endpoint look for. And it's very difficult, I can tell you, I've been through this 3 times now, it's very difficult to cross that chasm. Yeah, because what's successful there is actually very unsuccessful here. Yeah? Now, that was important, because some of the things you can do, if you can sell here, that actually reduces your cost of sale. And one of the reasons I made my name on as a strategy director was this is 1990s. We were an IT company, we were Anglo-Dutch with one small German subsidiary in Aachen, which was wonderful. I fell in love with the bakery in Aachen, all right? So I would go there on a frequent basis. Yeah, they bake wonderful bread there. And we were the best in the world at object orientation and rapid application development. But nobody was buying that, they were just buying legacy system management. I'd removed Cobol and Fortran from my CV because I didn't want anybody to know I could code in Cobol and Fortran. And everybody says the year 2000 was nothing. They don't know how much bloody effort we all put in to make sure it didn't happen, all right? It was, yeah, it was hell, right? And we did it, all right? I mean, we should be quite proud as a profession on that. Yeah? Smith Foundation were very cynical, by the way. They got the Italians to design the program, the Germans to execute it, and the British to be around when it went wrong. They were playing with cultural stereotypes there, right? Yeah, so the British are really good at ad hoc, which, to be honest, they are, right? This is how it works. So either way, so what we did is I went to Unilog in Paris and took their method for legacy system management. So they were the leading legacy system management provider. So we took their method, which in the UK was good because we could say that we had les méthodes françaises, which always goes down well with the English, right? And we took all their cases and everything else, but we differentiated it with object orientation and RADJAB. So the thing we were really good at, we didn't sell directly, we added it to something that people already wanted to buy, so we looked slightly different.
When did you work with Unilog? When did you work with Unilog?
1990s.
The same year.
Oh right, well, do you know Didier?
I was there from 93 to 96.
Okay, so Didier was from...
Didier Hammer.
He was from Brittany.
Okay.
So he and I could speak in Welsh, and nobody knew what we were talking about. And Sonia was my main contact. Remember Sonia?
Okay, the world is small.
This is a small world. So I spent a lot of time with Unilog.
Okay. I spent there 3 years. So.
Okay. That was when I learned about French management structures, which are quite fascinating. And Didier was brilliant because to actually be somebody from Brittany who didn't go to a Paris Grande École to be on the board of a Paris company.
DTM?
Yeah.
You're sure?
No, it's the other Didier. It's the Didier was Breton. He was a Breton.
It was Breton.
Yeah, but he hadn't been to a Grande École.
We have to take the
That's for dinner.
So either way, so what we did is we said we can object encapsulate legacy code. We never did it, but people thought that was a cute idea if we could. And we had object libraries of new code to link with it, and we used RadJab to do workshops. So everybody knew we could do what everybody else was doing, but we had something which made us look different. And within 12 months, that was 75% of our sales, and it turned the company around. Right? And after that, actually within a year, RadJab and object orientation were our dominant seller. Because people experimented with it as part of the legacy management, they got excited, they realised what it would do. And I'll talk tomorrow about what we're currently doing on sensemaking to make that possible for you guys. Is get people involved, get them to play with it, then they start to understand it, then the sale is easier. So that's an example, effectively it's a symbiotic marketing strategy. You attach something new and exciting to something old and boring that people have got budgets for. And that's what we're doing with S-Drive mapping. You've got a budget for organisational change, we can reduce the risk. Yeah, you see how that works? Yeah. So either way, I went on to develop this, and I combined it with S-curves. Everybody knows about S-curves? Yeah. Oh, S-curves look like this. Yeah. Letter S, right? Inverted and all that sort of stuff. They're called S-curves in the UK. And so what actually happens is that you get the early adopters buy something, then you go into the chasm, then you go into growth, maturity, and it ends.
That's the hype cycle.
Hmm?
That's the hype cycle.
Yeah, well no, it's not quite, it doesn't look quite like the hype cycle, because it's got this and it's got that. And it doesn't have the trough, and that's not as big a peak. Yeah? And then I said, the reason for the chasm is the old idea is running out of time. Yeah? So basically, the old idea is running out of utility, so there's space for something new, but the old idea is so dominant, it suppresses demand because it's difficult to sell. And the chance to change is here. If you don't change in that space, you die. And this is called the acceptation point. Because actually when you reach here, you're shifting from order to complexity. And the way you innovate in complex is to reuse existing capability for something novel. Because that gives you first mover advantage. IBM did it famously. They were the worldwide market leader in typewriters and punch card controlled industrial machines. That meant they knew how to do that stuff, so they got first mover advantage. They didn't invent that, they reused it. Yeah? They then became commodified. That's what happens here. When something becomes a commodity, the apex predator doesn't realise it until it's too late. Because the top of the market, and nobody got fired for buying IBM. Nobody gets fired for implementing McKinsey's report.
And that's the Kodak moment, or the Nokia moment.
It's the Kodak moment, right? So what happened is IBM thought it was all about hardware. They gave Bill Gates the right to the operating system he built for the IBM PC, but they didn't think software mattered. And then guess what? Yeah, hardware became a commodity. IBM suffered a massive corporate loss. Yeah, it went down here. The entire European community, European computer industry, with the exception of Siemens Medical, disappeared. It vanished. Right? IBM recovered, but never at the same level. And the same happened then. So then hardware was a commodity. Yeah? Microsoft then saw software dominated. Software became a commodity. We had open source. Apple took over because Apple is an ecosystem. Yeah? And Microsoft is starting to recover, but it's using the same model for its AI tools that it used for Office, which will actually destroy it in the short term anyway, right? But this is the thing you watch for if you want to change. When something reaches the peak, then you can introduce new things. So when you're starting to get the early signals that the dominant way of working in this company isn't working anymore, That's where you start to develop the new stuff. You don't do it down here because it's too difficult. The energy cost of change is too high.
That's precisely the two loops model there.
Yeah.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
When was that invented?
I don't know, it's,
A couple of years ago.
This was 1994.
maybe it wasn't invented, maybe it just was applied, right?
Okay, this was 1990s,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Can't read the writing. What's that point called?
Exaptation.
Thank you.
So that's where you find something, and this is a space where you start to run lots of little parallel experiments. And I'll give you an example of exaptation. Remember I said we do it through abstraction?
Exaltation.
Exaptation. So it's a neologism. Adaptation is things develop in a straight line. So dinosaurs, feathers evolved, all dinosaurs had feathers. And they were very colourful. We now know that from discoveries in China. One type of dinosaur developed a skin flap on its forelimbs to better display the feathers. The only evolutionary reason for colourful fellows is mating. Yeah? So feathers evolved for that. That dinosaur was prey, not predator, so it had to run very quickly. It put its forelimbs out, it glided, that's how we got flight. So a trait which evolved for one function under stress exapted, it didn't adapt for something different. Because if dinosaurs jumped off cliffs in the hope of evolving feathers before they hit the ground, it's probably they wouldn't get much of a chance to breathe, right? The cerebellum at the base of your brain evolved in higher apes to manipulate muscles in fingers, we think, so that you could feed better. Exapts in humans to manage grammar in language. Grammar is too big a step to happen in a linear way. It requires a non-linear repurposing. Most of your higher functions evolve for something completely different. Yeah, that's actually fascinating to look at if you think about it. So evolution, and we had a problem until exaptation came along, because there wasn't enough geological time for humans to evolve.
Is the cerebellum the piece that grows for effort? The more effort we put into it?
It actually has an impact on that as well. Yeah, and there's all sorts of stuff on that. So the corpus callosum at the end. It's why the left-right brain dichotomy is just really, really bad science. I can agree with a lot of Ian Gilchrist says, but that primitive sort of history of humanity is just bad, and it's really bad science. Yeah, human beings are not rational and emotional. There isn't a master and emissary. Yeah, we do use all of these things all the time, and it's only a cognitive framing anyway, right? Human beings love these dichotomies. It's the adverse effect of St. Augustine, who I can't stand, right? I had to read City of God. Well, he's a bloody hypocrite. Or I've sinned, and now I'm old enough that sin isn't fun anymore, so I'm going to discover God to go to heaven, right? That's hypocrisy.
So in a way, all of this is a cerebellum growth exercise.
To some extent, yes. I'm doing my best to stretch you a bit. That's a good way of explaining it, right? I'll remember that one. So, and I gave you the example of microwave ovens and drugs, right? Now we can manage that. Remember I said manage serendipity?
Right.
So this is Sensemaker. One of the projects we did when I was in Eindhoven, yeah, was Philips Lighton then had the idea that if you bought lights as a garden feature, that there would be a new market. Because in that time, people bought lights to light their garden, they didn't see lights as a garden feature. And that's all changed. Yeah? My annual purgatory is to have to go to the Chelsea Flower Show, which I do for the sake of my marriage. I now go as an anthropologist and observe the people so I can cope with it, but I can't stand the flowers, all right? But now if you go to the show gardens, you'll see light is there with rocks and plants. Yeah? So either way, so what we did is we gathered across Europe 3,000 stories in a week using social media about gardens people like, gardens they would like to have, take a picture of a garden, tell a story about it. And we didn't ask questions about light or shade, we hid that in the triangles. And I'll come back to that later. The whole point about the triangles is nobody knows what you're looking for. Because you can't trust the result if you do, right? So we hide that in it. When we looked at childhood teenage suicide, we actually put things like obesity and bullying into the triangles. We didn't ask direct questions about it. Because you want to see what naturally occurs if people are given a chance, not if you prompt them for it. Yes, that's one of the sensemaking principles. So we gathered those stories, and then we took the principles, the lowest coherent unit, was whatever you could package and ship as an electrical unit. That's what we tell the engineers. Yeah, and engineers understand that, pack and ship, well, I got that. And we got them to index it onto the same triangles that we use for the gardens. We use different language, these are polymorphic things, so same concept, different language. And then we match the two databases together at the level of abstraction. Remember I talked about this? This is abductive software. So I threw them together at a level of abstraction. We got 6 clusters. And then we went to marketing and say, why are these stories associated with these technologies? Right? That's actually prompting people in a very different way. I talked about managed serendipity. And one of the successes on that, which I'm deeply, deeply ashamed of, is there a plastic rock which is still selling, even after Philips have gone, in Southeast Asia, which changes lurid colours based on human proximity more from water flow. It is truly and utterly tasteless. But it's entirely based on a technology originally designed to handle urine-saturated staircases in Eindhoven football stadium. That's acceptation. You want to innovate in a company, that's the way you find out what you are already good at that you could use for something completely new. All right? And that is a much lower cost of innovation than trying to invent from scratch. And if you've got the right networks into universities, you can find the things that they've got that they don't know what they could be used for. Because generally, innovation is repurposing, not what it's designed for. Yeah? So that's something we can talk about, because that's actually is a really good thing to sell to companies. It's low cost, it's fast, and it doesn't say, this is what it says, we're going to suggest things to you you can look at. Yeah? So that's abductive work at scale. Right? So anyway, that's the abductive point. This is the what I call the last chance saloon. Because actually, it's very sensitive. You've got a very limited period to change there. After this, you can't recover. Right? And the trouble is, companies don't notice this till it's too late. So we can actually build anticipatory triggers for this, and actually S-line mapping is a way of avoiding that problem.
You know anticipatory triggers? Yeah.
Okay, so let me give you the example. That when you were, I presume you had these in Germany, we had these books as children, you know, colouring in books.
Yeah.
And you'd have a black and white picture of a park, and it would say, in this black and white picture, the artist has hidden 15 kitchen utensils. Familiar with those? Because you knew they were there, you found them. If you were saying anything unusual about this picture, you wouldn't. So the key thing with human decision making is to make them aware that there is something anomalous, then they will look at it differently. That's engaging novelty receptive processing. Yeah? It won't happen just because you try and train them to. They have to know there's an anomaly. So that's kind of like a life cycle thing. This is one of the options for actions in S-string. Like when it gets to here, the energy cost of change will go down rapidly. So we'll monitor for that, and when that happens, then we'll change it. Okay? But that's a generally useful model, yeah, in terms of the way it works. Okay? Right, so organisational change. Now, I've done a lot of this already. Right? And I want to say something up front. Hierarchies are good. If you don't have a hierarchy in a company, the alpha males will create it anyway. Or the alpha females, and I've said that's more dangerous, all right? Yeah. Well, if you look at it in animals, all right? And if you upset an alpha male but you submit, you'll get a nip on your throat. If you upset an alpha female, your throat will be ripped out so you can't go back and harm a cub. So I'm not making an absolute metaphor on this, but yeah, the point is that you don't want the dominant person to dominate, all right? So actually designing a hierarchy with fairness in it is quite important. Yeah? And also, people like to know who they report to. Matrix organisations, which came out of systems thinking, are an unmitigated disaster because you end up with multiple people, none of them will take responsibility because they can always blame somebody else. Yeah, the same is true of a lot of... Anybody read Reinventing the Organisation by the Crocs? Okay, it's one of the worst ever books written in management science. Because all he does is select aspects of cases which support his theory. And he ignores the aspects of the cases which contradict it. It's that bad.
Which book?
Reinvented the organisation. It's also spiral dynamics, God help me, which is eugenics in modern form. But of course he can't go with Wilbur, so he's got to go teal, because Wilbur is turquoise, so he's at a high state of enlightenment. Right? Don't get me onto that. It actually says that in the book, alright? I mean, turquoise was invented by Wilbur because he wanted to be a higher statement of enlightenment than Cowan. And they just keep adding these layers to it, right? And the entire research is based on one group of students in a Midwest college over 3 years. And they generalised to humanity from that.
Yes.
And he's lost the research, so nobody can look at it. So don't get me onto this, right? Okay, so you need a hierarchy. But you don't need 2 or 3 competing hierarchies. You also need silos. You can't get rid of silos. Okay?
But you said you were talking with General McChrystal now. He's saying something different about silos now.
I've agreed, disagreed with Stan and agreed with him.
Okay.
Right? And if you want to come to Arlington sometime, we'll be having that, have fun. We've actually disagreed at the Marine Staff College,
Okay.
which we both thoroughly enjoyed, all right?
Okay.
And I think he agreed I was right at the end, but he probably thinks the other way around, right? So you do, in special forces you can't have hierarchies, but you still have to have hierarchies to make special forces work.
Okay.
Right? And silos are also critical. The reason for silos, and this is the basic knowledge management curve, this is Brasso's work, we have abstraction and codification. So abstraction, sometimes she's had to translate because I've used high abstraction concepts. So if I was teaching this course at a university with a bunch of complexity scientists, we'd already be 3 days on. That's why silos work, because you have specialised language, people know the history, you can reference it. And we've been trying to get rid of silos. I traced it back in history. The first complaint about silos in government is Solon the tyrant of Athens. So we've been trying to get rid of silos for thousands of years and we haven't managed it. So maybe there's a reason, right? And the reason is very simple. The curve here goes like this. So at the highest level of abstraction, the cost of codification is virtually 0. So that's where I have a conversation with myself. Yeah, which used to be, it's changing these days as I'm getting older, but fundamentally I can scribble some things on a paper. The cost of codification is absolutely 0 because I share all my own education, my experience, etc., etc. Yeah? On the other hand, if I want to share everything with everybody, the cost of codification becomes infinite. And there's actually a very narrow band between what we call the upper level of acceptable abstraction and the lower level of acceptable abstraction, within which any conversation can meaningfully take place. And a big mistake people make with communities of practice is to say that we're all interested in a subject, we'll put them all in one community. The trouble is it's too wide a level of abstraction. So the really experienced people just don't bother anymore. Yeah? So this is a key thing to understand, and that's why silos are important. But what you can do with silos is you can connect people. All right, now here there's a fundamental metaphor, which is actually almost a real description. If you go into any natural environment and you look at trees, they have tree roots. And the tree roots are arboreal. They go in, everything springs from everything else. If you kill it off up here, everything downstream dies. Yeah, this is why I don't like construction law as well. But basically, trees are solid, you can see them, they entangle, but everything goes in one line, everything branches off everything else. Connecting those tree roots are microconsia, is that how to pronounce it?
Mycorrhiza.
Yeah, okay. So, which are rhizomic roots, which actually you can break them and they reconnect. So they're reconnected all over and they actually link the roots.
Das musst du mal übersetzen. Wie hast du das?
Mykorrhiza-Pilze, das sind so Symbionten, die Wurzeln von Bäumen mit der Umgebung vernetzen und die tauschen Mineralien und Wasser aus.
Alarmschau, also auch Alarmsignal.
Ja, genau. Also das
Das
ist
ist ein
eigentlich das
Riesennetzwerk aus
Connective Tissue, was die
So it's a symbiotic relationship. The fascinating thing is during times of drought, the rhizomic roots will redistribute resources to weaker trees.
ja.
And that's not because of any panpsychic nonsense, it's an ecology. If you want some other examples, the levee walk, which explains basking sharks and is also used by indigenous hunters, is the most effective way of finding resource when you don't know where it is. So each hunter does a little random walk, and every now and then one of the hunters does a massive leap to a new territory. And that's a type of Pareto distribution, right? It's called a levy walk. All right? And actually all animals hunt on that basis. Right? Waggle dance of bees, anybody know that one? Yeah. I'm working on this at the moment. These are examples of networked intelligence which doesn't require knowledge or direction. Right? In an organisation, that's the informal networks. The informal networks are key. In IBM, the first question you ask anybody now is, who do you work for? Or who do you know? But you needed to find out which networks they were in, because some networks were trustworthy and some weren't. Right? And actually, network density is key. Right? So, one of the key measures of resilience, and this is something you say to OD people, is you want everybody within 3 degrees of separation of everybody else. So if everybody's within 3 degrees of separation of everybody else, you've got a really effective communication channel. Yeah, everybody can actually get access to the CEO through the informal network, whereas the formal systems will never allow it. Right? And these are hidden, but you can stimulate them. So this is actually where we originally started work 25 years ago with something called social network stimulation, where we said instead of trying to make all these things formal, let's just make the informal things stronger. Yeah? And we now do that with entangled trios. Remember I talked about young person, older people management? If I run entangled, and another one we've used a lot, all right, is young bright coder who can write code very quickly with old cynical systems architect. All systems architects become cynical pretty fast, right? With user trained to talk to IT people. Because as I said, it's a lot easier to train users to talk to IT people than the other way around. And actually repurposing for this, the UK government's handbook, which says, so your child has got Asperger's syndrome, all I'm doing is translating it into management speak. Because if you're dealing with programmers, don't introduce a new idea until the old idea is fully absorbed. Yeah, I mean, there's a whole body of rules on this, and actually they work. So we throw 15 triers at a problem rather than one systems analyst. Because a systems analyst will only see what they expect to see. 15 triers will find the gorilla. And actually it's cheaper, it's easier. It also builds informal networks between IT and the users, which will be really valuable when the system goes out. Now with those methods, if you flex the membership and run the thing continuously on a 6-monthly basis, and by the way, this is far more effective to solve problems than any other technique, yeah? Then actually within 2 years, everybody is within 3 degrees of separation of everybody else, even with 40% turnover and limited participation. Right? Now that is a classic complexity approach. You're changing the substrate, yeah, to allow a different type of communication, and you can measure it. Right? So that becomes a key KPI for the HR department. Yeah, if the average distance of separation goes to 3.5, you've got a problem. Because the evidence is people won't do more than 2 or 3 phone calls before they give up. Yeah, and it's called trust tagging. You know, I say I've got a problem, can you solve it? You say I don't know, but I know somebody can. That trust carries about 2 separations and it breaks down. Yeah? Now that's a method for organisations. So we say have the hierarchy, but then run lots of trios or quins, 5 works the same way, on problems. Right? So instead of having lots of structure, you basically say what we're going to do is we're going to network the silos. And our goal is to network the silos, but we're going to do that by doing things that people find useful to do anyway. Right? So remember I talked about the stuff we did in Northern Ireland, dumping people in Latin America, it's the same principle. Now the other thing you can then do with this, which is where we're moving, so this is new, is you can say, well, I've got 5 roles. Yeah? One of the roles is anonymous. So nobody knows who it is. It could be an individual, it could be a committee, it could be changing every time you have the contact, you don't know. That is a transparency question. It's called a panopticon effect. It means you know you're being observed, but you don't know who is observing you. which is a far more effective control mechanism for ethics and finance than anything else. Yeah? And what we say is we define the roles for the task, and I'll talk about, this is a really good consultancy sell, because you don't sell this up front. You sell 6 months of simulation exercises to work out how to get it work. So we're about to do that in the NHS. Right? So we're going to run 6 months of simulation in which we will take clinical decisions, which currently have a huge amount of bureaucracy behind them. I've got to get authority for this, I've got to make a business case, when the clinicians know what to do anyway. So we're going to run 6 months of experiments, one day every month, with different groups of clinicians to see what combination of people is actually the most effective at making the decision. So you might, for example, have a neurosurgeon, a triage nurse with 10 years experience, a junior doctor with less than 1 year's experience, because actually new drivers see things that old drivers don't. You want those combinations. So we play with those combinations, and we basically say, if you guys get together and you make a decision, you can spend money. But you have to record the evidence and what happens afterwards. That's where we use sensemaker, that's cheap narrative capture. Right? And what that means is we can allocate large sums of money very quickly in small amounts.
But how's the anonymous guy installed? I don't get this one.
It's virtual.
It's an email address or what?
No, it's actually a virtual presence. You just never see the thing, and you just we can put voice scrambling on it. If you
So
want.
in a team meeting, kind of. There's
Yeah.
a team meeting, and then there's one party who is
Completely anonymous.
there but anonymous.
Yeah. And we're actually thinking of making that AI based. And we're working on that at the moment. We've got the training data set. So the principle is you don't know, and you've got to record the evidence. So if you look at the big development banks, this is where I've been illustrating it, they can allocate 50 million easily, but they can't allocate $100, $500 amounts. But everybody knows the the $100, $500 would have bigger impact. The other thing they know is people who are good at getting grants probably shouldn't be given them. And the same is true in organisations. People who are good at winning investment cases probably shouldn't be given the investment. Because what they're doing is they're promising stuff, it's all that, that negative cycle. So we say, okay, what we do is say, well, if you can assemble these 4 roles, so one of the ones we're doing in the Philippines is priest, headman, youngest senior girl in the school teacher. Yeah, so we're playing with the rules, and if those agree together with an anonymous agent from the bank, they can spend $500. But they have to record why, and we can algorithmically check they've done that. They have to record what happened afterwards. Then we can see out of our 100 experiments which are working and which aren't, and the rest of the money can flow to amplify the good stuff. Now we think that is huge in companies. We've been working on it in the NHS now for a year, and we're getting ready to go for trial. We think we can rip 60% of the admin cost out of the health service and radically increase clinical engagement, because clinicians can make decisions without going through bureaucracy. This is really powerful for a company, because what it means as an executive is you're empowering people to make decisions, but only if they work collectively with people they're not familiar with. Anonymity means you've got complete audit control, so you've got less fraud than with delegation, and that's important, right? And then you can see what's working or not working, so anomalies will be brought to your attention quickly, which is what you want, rather than having to manage everything up front. And this is a tail of a Pareto distribution technique. And I say the way we recommend selling it is find the intractable problems, the ones where everybody gets frustrated with bureaucracy, and then we run half-day simulations, every 2 or 3 weeks for about 4 or 5 months, to actually not only work out what the combinations are and what the rules are, but to actually produce the evidence that will produce better results before you go live with it. And again, that doesn't challenge orthodoxy. It says, look, if this works, it can make a big difference. Because it could rip out non-productive costs while it's increasing actual control.
How do you,
How would you set up those kind of teams? Because there might be people that are looking for alliances and people that have same
That's
thing.
okay, but basically it's self-organisation within constraints. I'll give you another example on that in a minute. You basically say you have to self-organise into a team, but your team has to have these roles. Yeah, so because we know that if you self-organise into a team, you take a commitment. By the way, this is a key project delivery technique. You agree a minimum viable product, a maximum deliverable product, a minimum available resource, a maximum available resource. Then people self-assemble in roles and contract to deliver at least the minimum viable product for the maximum resource. And if they self-assemble and agree, they will nearly always deliver. And in a multi-project environment, that's key. Because what matters is data delivery, not quality in that sense. And by the way, just to give an example, when I did the Helsinki air traffic management system, so if you fly to Helsinki, I did the UX design, we actually had 3 parallel teams working on each mission critical software element. Because we couldn't afford to get it wrong. And the same is true in organisations. People they don't realise having smaller teams working in parallel on the same problem actually reduces risk and reduces cost.
So with this, we've now moved on to the decision-making metrics, right?
But this is also resource allocation. So this actually stops the annual budget nonsense. It basically says we've got these big chunks, and if people can get together in this way, they can spend this amount of money, then the rest of the money will flow to the things which are working.
How do you know the decisions?
That will damage us because we rely on year-end money, but that's another matter.
How do you know the decisions are better than?
Well, that's why we do the simulation environment. So we take actual cases, we run the simulation on this, and to be honest, they don't need to be better, they just need to be at least not too much worse. Alright? Because actually, the problem at the moment is a lot of decisions are good decisions, but by the time they're made, it's too late. Yeah? So there's a balance of time and effectiveness on this. But this is something where we're now starting, if you haven't realised, our approach now is a physics approach. We start with the theory, we work out the mathematics. Once we got that right, we hand it over to the experimental physicists. We're the ones whose math wasn't good enough to be theoretical physicists. Sorry, they then get it right and modify consistent with the theory. They test the theory, and then once it's boring, we give it to the engineers. Right? That's the physics approach to life, and we're sort of doing the same sort of thing, right? So this is, and we're saying this in implementation needs to be experimental. So simulation environments are really powerful because people can play real games. You can force loss into the system. Yeah, and you can get the evidence to show how it would work and decide what the rules would be for team formation. But this is a tail of a Pareto distribution method. And it's a way of radically eliminating cost while not reducing effectiveness. So in government, it's about delivering more with less. Yeah? Now, what I've been talking about, and there's more to talk about, I've talked about action to map what you've got. We talk about ESTRO mapping, company level, everything else. Fundamentally, you're trying to make organisations much, much simpler. Right? Hierarchy people fit, dense networks, stimulate people into working together in small groups, see what works, reinforce it. You've just reduced management time hugely and increased responsiveness because you're dealing with the system as a complex ecology rather than as a machine. Yeah? So that's the base principle. Yeah? And as I say, within that, you can have negative stories to indicate where people shouldn't go. You can actually have alignment, which we'll talk about tomorrow. So the way we do alignment is we literally gather stories. We show everybody a story map for their own area of competence. Yeah, so there's a principle in complexity. I'll illustrate this tomorrow, so don't panic if you don't get it, because we're coming to the end of time anyway. Never aggregate an aggregate. Yeah, that's a core principle. So what you do is you aggregate from the same source material at people's level of competence to do something. So I can show you the map of your employee attitudes at the company level. And by the way, attitude mapping is something we'll talk about tomorrow. Attitudes are lead indicators, compliance is a lag indicator. If we can measure lead indicators on things like security, risk, safety, you can intervene much faster and much easier, right, in terms of the way it works. So we'll talk a bit about that tomorrow, all right? But the fundamental principle is an executive looks at the data for his own area of work, not for the company as a whole, and says we need more stories like this, fewer stories like that. So actually everybody is probably starting from a different place and going in a different direction, but the whole system is starting to align. And you stop those one-size-fits-all company-wide initiatives.
Silly question. So if these tools work, why do we still have a shit NHS and German health system?
Oh, well, you've got a better system than we got. Because actually, two things have happened. One is they've got reorganisation disease. Secondly, the people who manage the NHS, if you go into an American hospital, they've got problems with insurance. You go into an American hospital, they're all run by doctors. They actually call themselves cullies. If you know Dr. House?
Yeah.
Yeah, so they actually have the annual Cully conference. I speak at it regularly. So they're not brilliant doctors, but they're good administrators. But they understand enough about the doctors not to be fooled. Yeah? You go into a British hospital, you'll find a management consultant surrounded by 3 MBAs managing everything with spreadsheets. Right? And that's a problem. And so my friends who are doctors do not want to be operated on by anybody under the age of 50, because they say the surgeon training model went to function by function rather than by team. And therefore people lost the capacity to understand and develop. And I think the German system has got some of the same problems. If you want to turn that ship, that's a big difficult one. We're now working with, we've done a lot of work on patient journeys. We've been certified by the Chief Medical Officer as the only effective patient voice. Yeah, but we're now starting trials with Great Ormond Street and others on this approach. Because they won't take risks. If they really, and at the moment, we're not bidding for leadership training contracts, that we actually approve, because they're mandating systems leadership. You remember I said about when you can't sell it to government, sell it to, yeah, that's what they're doing. They've got an OD practice which is locked into very old ways of thinking, and they want to reinforce it. So it's not an easy system to change. So our model, to be honest, is a retrovirus. If you want to change a bureaucracy, think retrovirus. Retrovirus corrupt the DNA of the host.
Retrovirus.
Yeah? Yeah. So it will take time, right? But then the peak is at the moment. Basically, we can't satisfy demand.